My husband and best friend betrayed me. So I exposed their affair in the most savage way possible, and then My life was never extraordinary, but it was mine, built carefully over the years like a puzzle where every piece fit just right. I had a husband I adored, 2 sons who were my world, and a best friend who had stood beside me through every high and low. My husband, Adam, was a well-respected man in our community, charming and thoughtful in all the ways that mattered, or so I had believed. He had been married before, and when we met, he was raising his son, Jason, on his own after his ex-wife's struggles made her incapable of being present. When Adam and I married, I embraced Jason as my own, determined to give him the stability and love he deserved. 3 years later, we had another son together, Noah, whose laughter filled our home with warmth. For years, our life was the picture of happiness. Family dinners filled with conversation, weekend soccer games, and nights spent curled up together watching movies. I never saw the cracks forming beneath the surface, not until it was too late. Lena had been my best friend since college, someone I had shared my life with for over a decade. She was effortlessly magnetic, the kind of woman people gravitated toward without realizing why. She had married young, to a man named Noah, whose wealth afforded her a life of luxury. But money had never filled the void in her marriage, and over the years, she had confided in me about her growing dissatisfaction. "He's great, but there's no spark," she would say over coffee, her voice tinged with a bitterness I didn't fully understand at the time. "You and Adam, though, you have everything." I used to think her words came from a place of admiration, maybe even envy, but I never imagined they masked something far more insidious. For a while, I ignored the little things that should have warned me. Adam had always been affectionate, the kind of man who left love notes on the fridge and sent flowers just because. But then, something shifted. The notes stopped appearing. The flowers stopped coming. He started coming home later, offering vague excuses about work obligations. When I asked if something was wrong, he would give me a tight smile and brush it off. "Just a long day," he would say, avoiding my gaze. It was subtle at first, the way his phone never left his hand, the hushed conversations in the other room, the way his body would stiffen when I walked in unexpectedly. It wasn't until I caught him quickly angling his phone away from me one night in bed that a cold, gnawing suspicion took hold. Lena changed, too. She had always been the kind of friend who shared everything. But suddenly, she was more reserved. Our long conversations became surface level, her laughter less genuine. She started canceling plans, showing up late or leaving early. And when we did see each other, there was something in her eyes, guilt, hesitation, something I couldn't quite name. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was being paranoid, that the woman who had been like a sister to me could never betray me. The night everything unraveled started like any other. I was folding laundry while Noah played in the living room, Jason upstairs doing his homework. My phone buzzed on the counter, a message from an unknown number. At first, I thought it was spam, but when I opened it, my breath caught in my throat. It was a hotel name, a room number, and nothing else. I stared at it, my heart pounding. I told myself it was a mistake, that it had nothing to do with me. But deep down, something inside me already knew. I made an excuse to my neighbor about an errand and asked her to watch the kids. The drive to the hotel felt endless, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I would get there and find nothing. But the moment I stepped into that hallway, standing outside room 217, I knew the truth was waiting for me on the other side. My hands trembled as I knocked softly, my pulse roaring in my ears. "Come in. Why are you taking so long? Help me clean up my spilled wine." A familiar voice called out, irritated and impatient. "Lena." For a moment, I couldn't move. My body screamed at me to turn around, to run, to pretend I had never come. But instead, I forced myself to push open the door, slipping inside. The room was dimly lit, the scent of expensive perfume lingering in the air. Lena was sprawled on the bed, wearing nothing but a silk robe. A bottle of red wine sat tipped over on the nightstand, staining the crisp white sheets. I bent down, pretending to clean, my heart pounding so hard I thought she might hear it. She hadn't even looked at me yet. "You know he's the only one who can satisfy me," she murmured, stretching lazily. God, I've always been jealous of her. Living such a perfect little life, playing house while She trailed off, turning her head slightly. And then her body went still. I had dropped the cloth. I was standing there, exposed, my disguise forgotten. Lena's face drained of color. "Camille," she whispered. And then Adam stepped out from the balcony. His phone was in his hand, but the second he saw me, he froze. His face, which had just been so open, so filled with warmth as he looked at Lena, turned to panic. For a second, the room was silent. Then, without thinking, I turned and bolted. I barely made it to the hotel parking lot before my stomach lurched. I doubled over, retching into the bushes, the taste of betrayal thick in my throat. I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand, my body shaking. It felt like the world had been ripped out from under me. How long had this been going on? How many times had they laughed behind my back? I drove home in a daze, my mind replaying every moment I had ignored, every lie I had believed. When I walked through the door, Noah ran up to me, wrapping his little arms around my legs. "Mommy, look, Jason taught me how to draw a dinosaur." His face was beaming, so full of innocence, and my heart shattered all over again. I knew what I had to do. That night, I sat in the darkness of our bedroom, waiting for Adam to come home. When he finally did, his expression was wary. He had seen my car in the driveway. He knew. "Is everything all right?" he asked, feigning concern, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. I met his gaze, my own unflinching. "I know." The words hung between us, heavy and final. Adam exhaled, rubbing a hand down his face, but he said nothing. There was nothing left to say. Adam stood frozen, the weight of my words crashing into him like a tidal wave. For a fleeting second, I saw something cross his face. Panic, guilt, maybe even regret, but it disappeared just as quickly. He opened his mouth, closed it again, then let out a heavy breath. "Camille, I didn't let him finish. I didn't want to hear his excuses or half-hearted justifications. I had spent years believing in the man standing in front of me, trusting him, loving him, building a life with him. I had let him into every part of me, given him my heart, my time, my loyalty. And he had thrown it all away. "You don't get to explain," I said, my voice eerily calm. "I saw everything." He ran a hand through his hair, his jaw tightening. "It wasn't," he hesitated, then tried again. "It didn't mean anything, Camille. It just happened." I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "It just happened? You're telling me you tripped and fell into bed with my best friend?" His face twisted with frustration. "You don't understand. Things between us have been different for a while." I felt my nails digging into my palms. "Different how, Adam?" "Because as far as I can remember, I was still kissing you goodnight. I was still raising our children. I was still here, loving you, while you—" My voice broke, but I swallowed the pain. I wouldn't let him see me cry. "Not now." "How long?" He exhaled, looking away. "How long?" Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Over a year." I staggered back as if he had struck me. A year. A whole goddamn year of lies, of betrayal, of looking me in the eyes while he was sleeping with her. A year of making love to me, of holding me, of pretending. The room felt too small, too suffocating, and I needed to get out before I screamed. "You need to leave," I said, my voice shaking. Adam's head snapped up. "Camille, please, we have to talk about this. For the kids." I flinched, my stomach twisting with fury. "Don't you dare use them as an excuse. You lost the right to stand here and talk about family the second you decided to betray it." For the first time, I saw something crumble in his expression. But I didn't care. I turned my back to him, walking out of the bedroom before I could break down completely. I made my way to the living room, wrapping my arms around myself as if that could hold me together. I heard the front door close minutes later. He was gone. That should have given me some relief, but it didn't. Because the damage had already been done. Sleep never came that night. My mind refused to shut off, replaying every memory I had with Adam and Lena, dissecting every interaction, every moment I had once dismissed as nothing. The way Lena had stopped meeting my eyes when I spoke about Adam. The way Adam had started declining date nights, saying he was too tired. The tension at dinners, the stolen glances I had ignored, the text messages I had convinced myself were innocent. I had been a fool. The next morning, I was barely functioning. I went through the motions, getting the kids ready for school, packing their lunches, forcing a smile when Jason asked if Dad was coming home early tonight. My heart clenched, but I just kissed his forehead and told him to have a good day. By noon, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. At first, I ignored it, assuming it was Adam trying to reach me. But then I saw the notifications, texts, missed calls, voicemails from numbers I didn't recognize. Confused, I opened my social media app and nearly dropped my phone. It was everywhere. A video. A video of Adam and Lena in that goddamn hotel room. It was grainy, but unmistakable. The intimacy, the way he touched her, the way she laughed against his skin, it was undeniable. And it was public. I scrolled through the comments, my stomach churning. People were already speculating, recognizing their faces, dragging my marriage through the mud. My hands trembled as I dialed a number I never thought I'd call. Mark. He picked up after 2 rings, his voice eerily calm. I take it you saw the video. My grip on the phone tightened. What the hell did you do? There was a pause. I did what needed to be done. You exposed my life to the entire world. My voice was rising, but I didn't care. You didn't just hurt them. You humiliated me. My children. Do you even care about the damage you just caused? Mark sighed, and for the first time, there was something like remorse in his voice. I didn't do it to hurt you, Camille. I needed them to suffer the consequences of what they did. I felt sick. So you decided to play God? They didn't just betray us, he said, his voice sharp. They tore apart 2 families, and they did it without a second thought. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I wanted to scream at him, to curse him for dragging my children into this nightmare. But the truth was, I understood his rage. I felt it, and that terrified me. Take it down, I whispered. Mark exhaled slowly. It's too late for that. The line went dead. I dropped the phone onto the counter, my chest heaving. It was too late. The damage was done. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Calls from concerned friends, whispers at the grocery store, even a reporter outside my house. The scandal was spreading like wildfire, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Then, Adam showed up at my door. His face was drawn, his hair disheveled like he hadn't slept. He didn't even try to come inside. He just stood there, his eyes filled with something close to desperation. Can we talk? He asked. I crossed my arms. You mean now? After your affair is broadcasted for the whole goddamn world to see. His jaw tightened. Camille, please. I should have slammed the door in his face. But I didn't. Instead, I let him in. Because as much as I hated him, as much as I wanted to erase every memory of what we had, there was still one truth I couldn't ignore. We had children, and somehow, we had to figure out how to move forward. Adam stepped inside cautiously, like he knew he was walking into a battlefield. He looked around our home, the home we had built together, the home where our children laughed, the home that had once been filled with love. Now, it was a crime scene. Every memory, every detail, tainted by his betrayal. He turned to face me, his hands shoved into his pockets, his eyes dark with exhaustion. I could see the weight of the scandal pressing down on him, but I refused to feel sorry for him. He did this. He chose this. I folded my arms, leaning against the kitchen counter, keeping the space between us as wide as possible. Say what you need to say. My voice was steadier than I felt. Adam sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Camille, I never wanted it to come to this. I never meant to hurt you. I scoffed, shaking my head. That's the thing, Adam. You didn't just hurt me. You tore apart our entire family. You destroyed everything. And for what? For her. His eyes flinched at the venom in my voice, but I didn't care. Was it worth it? Was sneaking around, lying, covering your tracks for over a year worth it? He swallowed hard. No, he admitted, his voice hoarse. It wasn't. That should have made me feel something, some pathetic, hollow victory, but it didn't. The damage was done, and an empty confession wasn't going to change anything. You should go, I said, my fingers gripping the counter behind me, grounding myself. Adam exhaled slowly, like he had expected that answer, but wasn't ready to accept it. Camille, we need to talk about the kids. My heart clenched, but I refused to let him see it. You think I don't know that? I said, my voice quieter now, but no less sharp. Do you have any idea how much I've been trying to shield them from this? From your mess? His expression darkened with guilt. I want to fix this. I laughed bitterly. You can't. I can try, he insisted. I don't want to lose them. I stared at him, my emotions a tangled mess of rage and devastation. You should have thought about that before you betrayed their mother. For a moment, neither of us spoke. We just stood there, the weight of everything thick between us. Then, finally, Adam nodded, accepting the reality of what he had done. He turned toward the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. "I'll call you later to talk about custody." His voice was tight, controlled, but I heard the cracks beneath it. I didn't answer. I just watched him walk out. And this time, I knew it was for good. The silence that followed was unbearable. I sank onto the couch, pressing my hands against my face, forcing myself to breathe. I had spent years loving that man, trusting him, fighting for him. And now, I was alone. The next morning, reality hit hard. Jason and Noah still needed breakfast. Lunches still needed to be packed. Homework still had to be checked. Life didn't pause for heartbreak. But everyone knew. The whispers at school drop-off, the lingering looks from the other parents, the way my phone buzzed with messages I had no interest in reading. It was suffocating. I didn't even realize I was holding my breath until I saw Lena's husband, Mark, standing near his car, watching me. Our eyes met, and for a moment, neither of us moved. There was no satisfaction in his face, no smugness for the chaos he had unleashed. Just exhaustion, regret, maybe even a little pity. I walked straight to him, my hands shaking at my sides. "You got what you wanted," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He sighed, crossing his arms. "No, Camille. I really didn't." I glared at him, anger bubbling beneath my skin. "You destroyed everything. You didn't just expose them, you exposed me. My children. Now we're all drowning in this disaster you created." Mark didn't flinch, but something in his eyes flickered. "I did what I had to do." "You mean you did what would hurt Lena the most?" I shot back. He didn't deny it. Instead, he looked past me, toward my car where Jason and Noah were waiting. "I never wanted to hurt your kids," he said quietly. "I thought you deserved to know the truth." I exhaled sharply. I already knew. You just made sure the rest of the world did too. Mark ran a hand down his face, looking suddenly older, worn down. I took the video down. I blinked. "What? It's gone," he said simply. "But it's too late, I know. Once something's out there, you can't erase it completely." My stomach twisted. I hated him for what he did. But at the same time, wasn't I just as guilty? Hadn't I wanted Adam and Lena to suffer just as much as he did? The difference was, he had acted on it. I shook my head. "I need to focus on my kids." Mark nodded, understanding. "For what it's worth." "I'm sorry." I didn't respond. I just turned and walked away. By the end of the day, Lena's life had completely fallen apart. Mark had filed for divorce, cutting her off from everything. She had tried calling me, multiple times, but I let every call go to voicemail. What could she possibly say to fix this? Sorry, wouldn't undo the year she spent stabbing me in the back. A few days later, Adam and I had the first real conversation about custody. We agreed that the boys would stay with me, and he would have visitation. I didn't fight him on it, not because I wanted to be merciful, but because he was the one who shattered our family. He could explain to them why their world had changed overnight. The first time Jason asked, "When is Dad coming home?" I felt my heart physically ache. How do you explain something so painful to a child? How do you tell them that the person they look up to, the person they love, isn't the person they thought he was? I knelt in front of him, brushing his hair back gently. "Dad and I are going to live in different houses now, sweetheart," I said softly. "But we both love you. That will never change." His little face twisted in confusion. But why? I couldn't tell him the truth. Not yet. Not at 10 years old. So I just hugged him, whispering, "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes. But that doesn't mean they stop loving their kids." I held him for a long time, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. I had lost my husband. I had lost my best friend. My life had completely changed in the span of days. But as I held my son, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let this destroy me. The days after the scandal felt surreal, like I was floating through my own life, watching everything from a distance. The world around me hadn't changed. The sun still rose. People still went to work. Kids still played in the park. But for me, everything was different. My marriage was over. My best friend was gone. And my children, innocent and oblivious to the storm raging around them, still looked up at me with trust in their eyes, expecting life to continue as it always had. That was the hardest part, pretending that nothing had shattered while walking barefoot over the broken pieces. Adam tried to call me every day. I ignored most of them. When I did pick up, the conversations were clipped, emotionless, focused only on logistics. Drop-off times, school schedules, visitation. It was easier to act like we were business partners negotiating terms than to acknowledge what we had once been. He never begged for another chance. He must have known I would never give it. Instead, he carried the weight of his mistakes quietly, like a man walking toward his own execution, knowing there was no last-minute pardon coming. I thought that would bring me satisfaction, but it didn't. There was no justice in watching someone you once loved destroy themselves. Lena, on the other hand, was relentless. She left voicemails filled with frantic apologies, her voice cracking under the weight of her own desperation. "Please, Camille, I swear I never wanted to hurt you," she sobbed in one of them. "I don't even know how it started. I was so unhappy, and he was there, and I made a mistake. But I love you. I still love you. Please don't shut me out." I deleted every message. I could have screamed at her. I could have met up with her just to watch her squirm, just to throw all her pathetic excuses back in her face. But what was the point? She had already lost everything: her husband, her cushioned life, her reputation. And most of all, she had lost me. That was the one thing she could never undo. The whispers around town never fully stopped. When I walked into the grocery store, I felt the weight of people's stares. I knew the exact moment they recognized me, the quick glance, the exchanged looks, the way their voices dipped lower. Some of them probably pitied me. Others just enjoyed the drama. Either way, I refused to hide. I refused to shrink myself because of their sins. So I held my head high, pushing my cart down the aisle like I wasn't the most talked-about woman in the city. The first time I ran into Lena in public, I almost laughed at the sheer irony of it. It was at the coffee shop we used to go to every Friday, the one where we spent hours gossiping, where we used to joke about the kind of old ladies we'd be one day. She was standing in line, her eyes downcast, her entire body language screaming discomfort. The moment she saw me, her face paled. I could practically feel her debating whether to run or stay. I let her squirm. When I walked past her, I didn't pause, didn't acknowledge her, didn't give her the satisfaction of a reaction. But just as I reached the door, I heard her broken whisper, "Camille, please." I stopped. For a brief moment, I considered turning around. I considered giving her the speech I had rehearsed in my head 100 times. "You were my best friend. You were supposed to be my sister. I trusted you with my life, and you betrayed me in the worst way possible." I thought about telling her how much I hated her, how much she had destroyed, how I hoped she would spend the rest of her miserable life drowning in regret. But instead, I simply looked at her, my expression blank. "You don't exist to me anymore." Then I walked out. That night, Adam called again. This time, I answered. "I saw you today," he said, his voice heavy. I sighed. "What do you want, Adam?" He exhaled, like he was choosing his words carefully. "I know you hate me. You have every right to. But I need you to know that I never stopped loving you." I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tightly. "That's the problem, Adam. You did stop. The moment you chose her, the moment you looked at her the way you used to look at me, you stopped." He was silent for a long time. Then, finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I wish I could take it all back." "Yeah," I said, my voice cold. "I bet you do." I hung up. The divorce was finalized faster than I expected. There was no battle, no drawn-out court fights. Adam agreed to everything. He signed the papers without protest, giving me full custody of the boys with scheduled visits. When I asked him why he wasn't fighting harder, he just said, "Because I already lost the most important thing." It should have felt like closure. But if I had learned anything from this, it was that closure didn't come wrapped in neat little boxes. It was messy, it was painful, and it was never truly complete. The last time I saw Lena, she was packing up her car outside the house she once shared with Mark. She had lost everything in the divorce. Mark had made sure of that. No alimony, no settlement, just her clothes and whatever dignity she had left. She spotted me watching from across the street, and for a moment, I thought she might say something. But instead, she just lowered her head and kept loading her things. I didn't feel sorry for her. A few weeks later, I heard through the grapevine that she had moved in with some distant cousin in another state. She was gone, and for the first time in a long time, I felt free. Life didn't magically go back to normal. Jason still had questions. Noah still asked when his dad was coming home. Some days, I still woke up expecting Adam's side of the bed to be warm. Some nights, I still fought the urge to pick up my phone and call Lena, just to tell her about my day, before remembering she wasn't my friend anymore. But I was healing. Slowly, piece by piece, I was putting myself back together. And this time, I wasn't doing it for Adam. I wasn't doing it for Lena. I was doing it for me. Healing wasn't a straight path. Some days, I felt strong, like I had reclaimed my life, like I had finally left the wreckage behind. Other days, I would be folding laundry and suddenly remember a small, insignificant moment. Adam bringing me coffee in bed, Lena laughing at one of my dumb jokes, and the wound would tear open all over again. It was exhausting, this constant war between progress and pain. But I had no choice except to keep going. I had two little boys who needed me, and I refused to let this define their lives the way it had shattered mine. The hardest part wasn't letting go of Adam or Lena. It was explaining things to Jason. He was old enough to sense that something was wrong, that his father wasn't just working late anymore. I had tried to keep things vague, tried to protect him from the truth, but kids weren't stupid. One evening, as I was tucking him into bed, he finally asked me the question I had been dreading. Did Dad do something bad? I froze, my hands tightening around the blanket. Why do you ask that, sweetheart? Jason frowned, looking down at his hands. At school, some kids were talking about him, about why he doesn't live here anymore. He hesitated, then looked up at me with those same blue eyes Adam had. They said he cheated. I inhaled sharply, my stomach twisting. What else did they say? Jason shrugged. That's it. But is it true? I sat down on the bed beside him, my heart aching. Jason, sometimes grown-ups make really bad choices. And sometimes those choices hurt the people they love. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Your dad made a mistake. A big one. But that doesn't mean he doesn't love you. Jason was quiet for a long time. Do you still love him? The question nearly broke me. I had spent so long trying to convince myself that the love I had for Adam had turned to hate. But the truth was, love didn't just disappear overnight. It eroded, crumbled, turned into something unrecognizable, but it still existed. I didn't love Adam the way I used to. I didn't want him. But did I still feel something when I saw him? Did I still grieve the man I thought he was? Yes, I admitted softly. I did. For a long time. But sometimes, love isn't enough. Jason nodded, his little face far too serious for a 10-year-old. Okay. He didn't ask anything else. He just curled up under his blankets and closed his eyes, like he had already accepted something I was still struggling to. The days stretched into weeks, then months. The scandal that had consumed my life eventually faded into background noise. The whispers at school drop-offs quieted. The pitying looks from neighbors stopped. People moved on, because that's what they did. But for me, the damage lingered. I had to keep navigating co-parenting with Adam, which was its own kind of torture. Every time he picked up the boys, I had to see him, had to hear his voice, had to act civil when all I wanted to do was scream at him for what he had done to our family. But there were small victories, too. I started going back to work, throwing myself into projects that reminded me I was more than just a betrayed wife. I reconnected with old friends, people I had unintentionally distanced myself from during my marriage. I even let myself go on a few dates, not because I was ready, but because I needed to prove to myself that I could. None of them led to anything serious, but that wasn't the point. The point was that I was still here, still capable of smiling, of laughing, of feeling wanted. Lena's life had completely unraveled. After Mark left her with nothing, she tried to rebuild, but her reputation was in ruins. No one wanted to associate with the woman who had cheated with her best friend's husband, especially not when the scandal had been so public. The last I heard, she had moved again, this time to a different city, probably hoping to start over where people didn't know her name. I should have felt satisfaction in that, but mostly, I just felt nothing. Adam was a different story. He still had his job, his house, his ability to see the boys. But I could tell the weight of what he had done was finally crushing him. He looked thinner, more worn out. The cocky confidence he had always carried himself with was gone. One evening, when he came to pick up Jason and Noah, he lingered at the door longer than usual. "How are you?" he asked, his voice careful, hesitant. I raised an eyebrow. "Why do you care?" He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Because I do." I crossed my arms, studying him. "Are you asking because you want to make yourself feel better? Because if that's the case, save it." He looked away, exhaling. "No, Camille. I don't know. I guess I just miss." His voice trailed off, like he wasn't sure he should finish the sentence. I tilted my head, waiting. "Miss what?" Adam swallowed hard. "You. Us. Everything." For a brief second, my heart clenched. Not because I wanted him back, God, no, but because I saw the realization in his face. He had lost me. He had lost the life we had built. And now, he had to live with that. I nodded slowly. Well, that's something you should have thought about before you threw it away. He looked like he wanted to say more, but I didn't give him the chance. I called for the boys, helped them into his car, and then shut the door. I stood there for a moment, watching him drive away. And then I turned around and walked back into my house, feeling lighter than I had in months. The past was behind me, and I was finally ready to move forward.